Hey, here I am. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Walter Bosley channel. As you can tell, I'm in a different room this time. Got different background going here because we've got the setup right here at the house. My webmeister's right here, and we're excited tonight because we have a long-awaited discussion with Sesh Heri, a guy that I have known for 18 years now. Okay, and we'll talk about that. He and I, and it's just exciting to have him here. Now, as you know, I've published the Wonder of the Worlds trilogy and the Handprint of Atlas, which most of you or many of you are very familiar with, as many of you have read it, and of course we re-released it last year, so a lot more of you have read it. The Wonder of the Worlds trilogy has been re-released. The second and third books are out and available in paperback, and the long-awaited hardcover edition of the first book, Wonder of the Worlds, is due shortly. We're bringing that to you very soon, and I'm very excited that it's the first hardcover release from my publishing company, Lost Continent Library. Okay, so I'm real excited about this. You guys are going to be too. Without further ado, let's bring in Sesh Heri and get this going.
Hey, Walter.
Hey, how you doing, Sesh? Hey, I
I'm doing
wanted
great.
to, I wanted to, I forgot here because we're doing things a little different. I always do the beverage of the week, and this particular one is suited to having you on
Oh, yeah?
because our friend Cardinal Sin sent me a whole box of new tiki mugs, and one of them, let me see if you can see that, is the Mars Attacks Martian.
Oh,
Isn't
wow.
that cool? It's
It is.
the Martian from Mars Attacks. And I figure out of all the new ones, here I am yelling again, and I've got a great audio setup. All the new ones, I figure tonight we're talking about Wonder of the Worlds. I had to do the Martian. So here we
Yes.
go with a nice ice
Ooh,
seltzer, healthy, sugar-free thing going on here. And there we go. That's a good start on that. So
gonna have my hot tea, but
very good.
I
Yeah,
got it.
hot tea. Hot tea. That's I just had a tankard full of that a little while ago, so
Yeah,
to make sure I was amped up.
yeah.
So, anyway, how are you doing tonight?
Doing great, Walter. I'm so
Good, good.
excited to be here. It's just a huge thrill, uh,
Yeah.
on a
We've
lot of
known each other
levels.
quite a while. Yeah,
We
we've
we've
known each
known
other
each
quite a
other
while.
so long. We've worked on so many things together. We
Mhm.
have so much in common, so much to talk about. uh, I'm sure we're not going to be able to scratch the surface on the whole thing, but
Right,
we'll give it
right.
a shot.
Well, we're introducing you to
Yeah,
a lot of folks who haven't read your books, but a lot of
right.
folks that have come to your books in recent years.
Yeah,
So I know they're excited. So let's go back to 2004 when we
yeah,
first met. When you first submitted Wonder of the
right.
Worlds, tell me on how that started on your end.
You want me to start with just the submission or how
Yeah,
Wonder of the Worlds began, the
well, we'll get
genesis
into
of?
Wonder of the Worlds
Okay.
itself, but in 2004 is when you
Well,
contacted me about submitting the book.
what happened was I had finished the novel and I already had some ideas about marketing it. And it involved David Hatcher Childress and his Adventures Unlimited book club. He sent it out with books that you could order, mail order in those days. I don't know if he still does that, but
Hmm.
I knew he only did nonfiction. So I had the idea of approaching him to publish my book as fiction. And then I noticed on one of the book catalogs there was a couple of fiction books in the catalog, And one of them was yours, it turned out to be. Um, so, in that process, one day I went over to a tower of books. They still existed in those days. In fact, here in Sacramento is where Tower originated. This is the home of Tower Books, Tower Records for the whole world. No one would believe it unless you're a Sacramentan, we know. And I went into this Tower of Books to look at David Hatcher Childress's book catalog or his magazine, World Explorers Club. And I just happened to look in the back in the classified section, and there was somebody asking for submissions for a new publishing company called Lost Continent Library. And they wanted fiction, they wanted short stories, novels. So I sent a letter, I think a query letter to you.
Yep.
And you responded and you said, send me about 10 pages, sample pages, which I did. And then you said, send a chapter. I sent the chapter. You said, send the whole manuscript.
Yeah.
This is back in the paper days, and
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I sent the whole manuscript. And then not very long after that, I got a call from you telling me you wanted to publish the novel. And that's how it started. That's how we got to know each other.
It was back in the days, of course, when I started Lost Continent Library, I was doing traditional print runs. That was back in the days when I had that kind of disposable income to do these things. And your book, Wonder of the Worlds, was the fourth title my company had published. I had done a classic reprint of Stanton Coblenz's The Sunken World from 1927. I had published Atlantis Adventure by an author, Tony Gagne, from down in Florida. He was 84 at the time, and he'd written an Atlantis novel set around the time of the destruction of Atlantis. And then I had published Secret of the Amazon Queen, my own novel, under the pseudonym I was using back then, when I got your submission for Wonder of the Worlds, and it was just fantastic. This is amazing. What a plot. You have Mark Twain and Nikola Tesla and a young Harry Houdini on an adventure on a Tesla designed and built airship to Mars in 1893. I mean, how could I say no to that? And then, of course, once I saw your writing, that was okay. This is great. This could be like a flagship franchise kind of thing. Once we talked more, and you explained that there was more to the story than just the first novel. So we did that first novel. Great cover art by Bob All, an artist friend of mine.
I always loved that cover. He did just such a fabulous job.
The statue from the Columbia Exposition that's on the cover. Years later, I went to Forest Lawn, the famous cemetery here where all sorts of famous historical figures and Hollywood people are buried. And there's a replica of that very statue in one of the areas.
Wow.
Absolutely beautiful thing. And as soon as I walked up, turned the corner and saw it, I'm like, hey, I know that statue.
Yeah.
And it's the cover, of course, for those of you who don't know, it depicts a scene from what was called the White City. Okay, it was the central area showpiece of the 1893, what's popularly called the Chicago World's Fair. It was the Columbian Exposition, and what it was commemorating the 400th anniversary. Is that right?
400th anniversary. That's right.
Yeah, the 400th anniversary of Columbus, the Columbus voyage, and it was, folks, really the opening to the 20th century. And if you go out on YouTube and you look for Sesh Heri's presentation at the 2006 or 7 UFO Congress, it's online out there. You'll see my introduction, and in that lengthy introduction, you'll hear how Sesh and I see the 1893 Chicago World's Fair as really kind of a precursor to the 20th century. But it was the first time that a major cityscape was lit artificially in the United States, right?
Right. It was the very
Yeah.
first time.
And Tesla was very much a part of that. And here's the thing that Sesh does: he takes real history, real people, real situations, and this is what he draws his novels from. So it's not as much fiction as you might think. It just makes it more real. And what that leads to is the specific genre it's in, and I'm going to let him explain it to you. But it's called fantastic realism.
Right.
Sesh, explain to them describe fantastic realism to them.
Well, I think it would be helpful to review a couple of other genres.
Mm-hmm.
There's realism, we know what that is, and there's science fiction, and I think everybody here knows what that is. But fantastic realism is neither realism nor science fiction, yet it might look like, in some cases, realism, and in others, it might appear to be science fiction. It depends on the reader, actually. How much does the reader know? The more the reader knows about alternative research, suppressed histories, the more they're into ideas that are very esoteric, the more they will realize that certain parts of a story in a fantastic realist novel are real. They are not fantasy, they're not even fiction, they're real. So, fantastic realism actually takes a frame of reality that is different from our conventional model of reality. And it uses that as the basis of the story. So as you read the novel, you're drawn into it thinking perhaps that, well, this is just a story, it's a historical incident or something. But then as you get into the story, some strange things begin to happen. And you wonder, well, is this just a fantasy the author's cooked up? Or there might be an introduction of unusual technologies. And you might think, well, this is science fiction. This is just something the author has imagined. When in actuality, it might be something that really did happen, but isn't in our official histories. Or it might be a technology that actually exists, but that most people don't know about. That is the essence of fantastic realism.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really is its own unique subgenre in literature.
Yes,
But
and I think that some authors veer into fantastic
mhm,
realism in their writings. It's sort of a gray area, that
mhm,
they might have elements of fantastic realism,
sure.
uh, whereas perhaps it's just science fiction mainly, or it is
Hmm.
just a realistic novel, but for some reason, some little element of the fantastic enters into it. So the genre is out there a bit, but very
Hmm.
few authors are writing in pure
Right,
fantastic realism the way I am.
right.
They're doing it a bit in South America, Spanish writers.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, how about you tell us what inspired you, what you to write Wonder of the Worlds, what you drew from, the actual history that you drew from.
Yes, quite a bit inspired me. Every thread in that novel is something that fascinated me for years. So there were at least three threads I can think of right at the moment. Of course, Tesla, there was Mark Twain, and there was Harry Houdini. And I had an interest in all of these historical personages for decades. The one I knew about the longest was Mark Twain. And I have a long, long history of my association with the character of Mark Twain, but it actually began when I was very, very young. Probably I was about 4 years old. I was heavily influenced by comic strips, animated cartoons, everything of the 1950s, where you had cartoon characters in newspaper comic strips. Uh, and there was a particular comic strip called Captain Easy about an adventurer who traveled all over the world. And he had a sidekick, a little boy. I can't remember if that was his son or just like a cabin boy or something. And there were several characters there. It was my brother's favorite strip. And I couldn't read yet, but he would read it to me. And there was one situation where this little boy ended up on a raft going down a river. And this old man started coming to him on the raft, talking to him, an old man in a white suit. And eventually it comes out in the story that this old man is Mark Twain. I didn't know who Mark Twain was, but my brother explained it to me. He said he's the guy that wrote Tom Sawyer. Well, I knew who Tom Sawyer was because I had just seen the movie Tom Sawyer in color. It was the first motion picture I ever saw, and I was very impressed with it. So I got a pretty good idea who Mark Twain was. He was a riverboat captain who wrote books. I had it there, you know. Today, our kids have no cultural literacy. They don't know the past. And, a lot of people like Newton R. Minow, who was the head of the FCC, I think back in the 50s and 60s, he's the guy who said television is a vast wasteland. And there was some truth of that. But I've always taken exception with that saying because to me, television, comic books, comic strips and newspapers, all of that is very important popular culture. We had a high popular culture back in the 50s, and I was immersed in it. And I got more of an education watching TV and reading comic books than I did from public school. And I'm serious about that. Yeah. I learned history, I learned English, and so Captain Easy introduced me to Mark Twain. I knew who he was. Now, a few years later, go to 1967, I believe. So Hal Holbrook does his famous Mark Twain Tonight as a CBS special. I watched that. I'm very impressed with that. But nothing more comes of it than just seeing it and being impressed with it. Now, some years later in high school, 1972, I was taking a modern American history course, and we had to have a term project about a particular author, American author, and I chose Mark Twain. I was interested in him. I had read a few of his short stories and Huckleberry Finn, so I knew who he was. And I got the idea, I was in drama at that time in high school, that I could do a little Mark Twain thing, just like Hal Holbrook did. So I did an encounter with an interviewer. I later found out that Holbrook did that as his first Mark Twain bit when he was starting out. It's a very funny bit. So that's how I got to doing Mark Twain. I did my own research. I started building a Mark Twain show very gradually. And eventually I started doing it professionally. And over the years, I played riverboats and theaters and all that. And so I really became immersed in Mark Twain. I knew all about him. I ended up reading probably everything that he ever published. A lot of things that were not published, I was able to read at the Mark Twain papers at UC Berkeley. So I did this in-depth research. And then in 1991, I discovered someone else. And this is what blew me away. And this was the inception of Wonder of the Worlds. I discovered Nikola Tesla. I had never heard of Nikola Tesla before. How I discovered Tesla, I was perusing magazines at the same Tower Books that I would later come across your ad in the magazine. Cool. Many years later. But this is 1991, same newsstand, everything. And there was a UFO magazine that I was flipping through, and I opened it up, and there was this strange looking tower, and it had a dome on the top. And the article was telling me about a man who had invented a system to transmit electricity wirelessly. And I read this article and I said, this looks like a bunch of disinformation. I think it's just something this guy kind of made up with half truths. And I didn't think much of it. But then later on, I started coming across some other articles about Tesla, perhaps synchronistically. And I began to take it a little more seriously. Then I came across Margaret Cheney's Man Out of Time, the biography of Nikola Tesla, and I read that. And that's when I was stunned, because I learned that Tesla was a real person, that he invented our technological civilization of electricity, whole cloth, the whole alternating current system of electricity, the transmission, the generation, all created by one man, all within the space of a handful of years.
Yeah.
And, but the thing that really grabbed me was that he was friends with Mark Twain. Whoa, I'd never heard of Tesla before. I had read all kinds of things about Mark Twain. I had gone to the Mark Twain papers. I had read Mark Twain's diaries, personal letters. I'd read all kind of books by scholars about Mark Twain. Never once did I get any mention of Nikola Tesla. Now, my oldest brother, originally started out with a major in college for electrical engineering. He did know quite a bit about electricity. So I went to him and I said, do you know who Nikola Tesla is? And he said he invented the Tesla coil. And over the years, I've asked very well-educated people, some with PhDs, do you know who Nikola Tesla is? And they wouldn't know. This was back in the 90s, before Tesla became a pop culture figure, and they wouldn't know. So I didn't feel too badly that I didn't know who Tesla was, but I began to educate myself about Tesla. And somewhere along the way, it hit me. I said, wow, wouldn't this make a movie? Mark Twain and Nikola Tesla. And what would they do? Well, of course, they go to Mars. Oh, yes. Yep. The story practically wrote itself in my mind in a flash.
Yep.
It was just filling out the details. Now, some years later, it took quite a long time before I decided to attempt the Wonder of the World story. Because I'd been very discouraged with the publishing industry, getting into it. I did have a lifelong interest in writing, and I had written a few things, nothing published though. But at one point there, and this was probably about 2003, I decided that I would attempt to write Wonder of the Worlds as a screenplay, and with the idea that I would submit it to a screenplay writing contest. So I did this, and I never did submit it to that contest, because after I had written it as a screenplay, I said, this really should be a novel. So that was the next step, and that began a lot more research and a lot more thinking. And in the process, it led to some very amazing synchronicities that started to develop.
And we will definitely get into that. We're going to talk about the other book tonight too, the one that they also really want to hear about, Handprint of Atlas. But so you decide later to go ahead and commit to writing the story, and you envisioned the whole saga before you wrote the first story, right?
Pretty much so. I thought what I really should do is write a trilogy of novels spanning the whole, it would be a 50-year period from 1893 to 1943. And it was quite challenging to think about it, but I just took it a step at a time. So I wrote the first novel, and I really wasn't sure where I was going to go with it. I knew the Philadelphia experiment would be part of it in the third novel, but that's about all I knew. And so I had a difficulty there in figuring out exactly where I'd go with the story. Now, the key to the whole thing of making it work as a trilogy was the character of Harry Houdini.
Mm-hmm.
A whole nother story there with Houdini. A figure I've been fascinated with most of my life since the age of 9. And I have some very deep, esoteric, karmic connections to Houdini. And I believe I probably understand Houdini better than anybody living today. And so when I decided to go for the second novel, obviously Houdini would have to be the main character. And that led to 1915 and the Panama Pacific exhibition in San Francisco, and of course Jack London. And it was such a rich field of information for me that once again that novel wrote itself. Once I decided to write it as Houdini as the main character, and Tesla in that is a secondary character. He's very important in the story. His technology is extremely important. But once I decided on the main course of events there, it became kind of self-evident, and I knew where to go to research that second novel. And another thing was really good was that most of the action of the second novel occurs here in California. And I know all these places because this is my home, and I was able, though, to go and do some very in-depth research. I went to Jack London's ranch several times, and Oakland, California, San Francisco, and I researched all this, and I think it really helped with that novel, so that I was able to write that within 1 year. And so much more was going on in my life personally at that time. I don't know how I wrote it. I really don't. That I produced that novel in 1 year. It boggles my mind that I did
because
that.
That's a colossal undertaking. I mean, an accomplishment. That
was.
Metamorphosis is, wow. It's an amazing
It's
work.
a long novel, but it's also a very complex novel because there are several plot lines, and I wanted to make it complex. Metamorphosis deals with time travel more than any of the other two novels. And I'm putting forth my view of time travel, which I think, in my opinion, time travel is very real. It actually happens. If someone read Metamorphosis and didn't know my viewpoint on that, they might think, well, this is just a fantasy, I have a very good friend who I was talking to about Metamorphosis, and he said, I don't like time travel stories because they're boring, because they're not real. It's impossible to travel in time. And I said, well, I used to think that too. Before I learned a little bit more about reality. And now I know that, oh yeah, you can travel in time. But what we're talking about is a multiverse. The grandfather paradox does not hold in the multiverse.
Right.
We live in a multiverse, and we have parallel time tracks going along with us at all times. You can jump over to another time track. Now, you might say, well, you're not really traveling in time. Strictly speaking, no. You're traveling into a parallel universe.
Interdimensionally, yeah.
Yeah, interdimensionally. But for all intents and purposes, you can go to the past, change the past. And this is what happens in Metamorphosis. They're dealing with multiple universes. And as the story progresses, it might get a little confusing. You got to stay with it because a lot of things are happening. They're jumping back in time, and and there's a second layer to the story too, because there's a prologue in the story, just like with Wonder of the Worlds. But in this prologue, it continues on throughout the body of the story. We keep cutting back to the characters in the prologue, and they're very important to the main story. Right. So I feel very good about that writing task, that I pulled that off. You know.
Oh, that's an accomplishment, particularly as you said, there was so much going on around you, you know, in your personal life, and and really. The energy that was generating is, you know, what got you through it. And then you round out the trilogy with The Lost Pleiad, which offers a potential fantastic realism explanation, answer to one of the great mysteries of the mid-20th century, or early.
Yes.
Yeah.
We come back to this multiverse idea again with Amelia Earhart. Her whole the whole mystery surrounding her disappearance just sort of begs to be treated as a interdimensional event. You know, that what happened to her, and even in conventional history, what I discovered in delving into the whole story of Amelia Earhart, things I didn't understand before, it helped me understand some of this, what's going on in suppressed technologies. I came to the conclusion that, well, first of all, let me say, Amelia Earhart had several Electra planes. It's pretty self-evident if you look at the details of that final world flight that they had more than one plane, and they were doing a kind of shell game with the planes, because now this is just the conventional part of the thing without getting into multiverse speculations.
Right.
The most sophisticated plane was in Florida, where she finally took off from Florida. They switched another Electra in Florida for this very sophisticated plane. It had special panels built into it, where she could film color motion picture of the ground. And then those panels could close up so that some plane flying at a distance would not be able to see that there were apertures in the belly of the plane. She probably had other types of detectors on board as well. But the thing I suspect strongly, very strongly, is that Amelia Earhart was using anti-gravity technology nested into that Electra plane, that very sophisticated plane. And what she was doing was switching from a conventional engine at certain points in her flight and veering off to do secret expeditions, secret reconnaissance and photography, motion picture photography, still photography of all sorts of areas, particularly in Africa and in the South Seas. She was there to photograph positions of the Japanese in the South Seas, and she was also photographing areas of Africa for troop movements in the future, for the planned World War II. So I believe this actually happened. This was part of a very, very secret operation that she was involved with. Her disappearance is a mystery. There are many theories. I read many books on different viewpoints. The authors had good ideas. I think it remains a mystery exactly what happened to Amelia Earhart. But in Lost Pleiad, it involves interdimensional phenomena. And what actually happened there in the story is Amelia Earhart gets switched with a double of herself from another dimension. So there's some interesting ideas. They're highly layered that involve alternative research, but then also speculative ideas about time travel.
Right. Right. I'm telling you, folks, this trilogy is just amazing. Absolutely. And if you just want it for the pure fun fiction entertainment, you can't beat it. It's going to be one of the best things you've ever read. Um,
That's one thing, Walter, that I've tried to do in
uh-huh.
writing my novels. First of all, and last of all, they've got to be entertaining. They've got to
Exactly.
be dramatic, entertaining, or even funny if I can manage that. And
It's all of
uh,
that. It's
it's,
all of that. And
you know,
because by being entertaining that way, you're able to capture their attention for the ideas. And that brings me
sure.
to, they hear me, my viewers, the regulars here at Walter Bosley channel have heard me talk about when I write my fiction, it's not just fiction for fiction's sake. There are threads of my research, the things I've experienced, woven through my fiction. And
Yes.
you, of course, do this in spades with the Wonder of the Worlds trilogy. As you as you were working on these books and writing them, you were also at the same time giving me an incredible assistance and very much involved yourself in the
Yes.
research and investigation on my Empire of the Wheel mystery.
Oh boy.
And
Oh boy.
the viewers know your contribution to those books and to that research, specifically where the mysterious but very real telluric currents, which many people refer to as ley lines, are concerned, and how that ties into time-space phenomena in synchronicity. And you were providing me with just incredible geomorphological analyses and such. And this knowledge was all based on, you had for 25 or 30 years been doing personal, research and studies on this general subject. And what resulted in that is a nonfiction book in which you present your ideas and your research along these lines, which is just an astounding book. And I think it's an
Thank you.
essential book for anyone interested in the topic. And really, if you want to really enjoy and fully grasp the Wonder of the Worlds trilogy, when you read it, it's essential to read the Handprint of Atlas.
Yes.
Tell us about the Handprint of Atlas.
Whoa. Huge subject. Okay. So when you say that I studied this for 20 or 30 years, and it's in the Handprint of Atlas at the beginning of the book, I try to give a little provenance to the ideas in the book.
Uh-huh.
They didn't just come out of the blue
Right.
about 1985. That's when the most dramatic thing happened that started me on the road of looking at ley lines. But actually, it's exactly like Wonder of the Worlds in that what happened with me was experiences I had in early childhood. And I talk about them a little bit, I touch upon them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you and I have a mutual colleague, I'll say, I won't say what his name was, who said that he didn't think an author should get into personal matters in a nonfiction book. But I felt in writing The Handprint of Atlas that I had to be, what's the term today? They like to use transparent.
Mm-hmm.
There should be some transparency about my background in certain regards, who I am and what my thinking is, and what has happened to me. And so I reveal these things in the Handprint of Atlas.
Mm-hmm.
I had some debate in my mind about whether I should come out with this publicly.
Right.
And my two brothers, they both passed away now, but they were very important in my life and I always ran things by them. And they had trepidation about me writing about this publicly, but I decided I had to.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the main things I discuss in the Handprint of Atlas at the beginning is my UFO abductions from early childhood. And I only scratch the surface of that. I don't get into the details of it, but I was abducted multiple times in my early childhood. And my family has deep roots in interaction with non human beings. So, right there, I'm putting my credibility on the line. But I'm going so far out in the handprint of Atlas, I'm not concerned about that. I'm trying to reach rational human beings who can think for themselves. I'm not interested in the established scientific community. I'm not interested in being peer reviewed by anyone. I'm I'm discussing this for the general public, and if the individual reading the book happens to be a professional scientist who can look at this in a rational way and not hypnotize to his professional belief system, then good. Let him read the book and draw his conclusions. But I'm not writing for the scientific community.
I think it's important that you note that too, because we're in this weird era, period, whatever you want to call it, where the hypercritical, it's they would not want people even having discussions about such things. That's how
No,
hypercritical they are. And actually, you know what? That's wrong. We should be able to
completely
have
wrong.
these discussions. This is how
Absolutely.
we share ideas and experiences, and there's nothing wrong with having the discussion of the extraordinary phenomena, the extraordinary experiences. Not every viewer, every reader has to believe or accept what the person is sharing, but the
Right.
discussion is nonetheless interesting and informative and useful.
Right.
So this is why I champion the discussion. There's nothing wrong with the discussion, and I think in the face of today's hypercriticism, it's important to remember that.
Right. I agree with you 100%. And that's why I decided to publish the book. So the book really began in my early childhood. And I described this in the Handprint of Atlas, how I used to look at maps when I was 2 and 3 years old. You see, I started drawing when I was about 2 years old. As soon as I could hold a pencil, I began to draw. Around the age of 3, I could draw Popeye the Sailor Man and several cartoon characters. And so I started trying to draw coastlines by copying road maps, like the coast of California or whatever coast you might name where the ocean abuts the land. And I was unable to do so to my satisfaction. My coastlines did not look real, and I couldn't understand why. It looked just like a wiggly line I was drawing, and it didn't. A real coastline has a certain look to it. Just perceptually. But I couldn't understand at that time what that look was to be able to reproduce it. And that went on for decades. I filed it away in my mind. I said, I got to figure this out someday. Well, it was a very sophisticated problem. It involved understanding statistics. It involved understanding geology, all kinds of things. So it was very challenging. But it was in 1985 when some very strange paranormal events happened to me during a trip to Florida, where my mind began to open up to those old questions about why does a coastline have a certain look? What is it about it that makes it look real and natural? And that was the beginning of my quest to understand ley lines and everything involved with them, because ley lines are not just simple geology
No.
or geometry. They're very complex structures, very with esoteric properties. This is what I began studying, and it took me till almost about the time I wrote Wonder of the Worlds to put it all together. Maybe around the year 2000, everything coalesced. I'd been working on it, steadily all those years from 1985 to 2000. That's 15 years right there.
Hmm.
And and it was as late as 2000, I hadn't put it all together. That's when I discovered something that really, it just blew me away. And it was the idea that was clearly there in my researches that the axis of rotation of our planet is artificial. And it's something that was established very recently in geological time, about 13,500 years ago. And so it was 2000 before I came to that conclusion. So then about 2006 was when I wrote the book. Just a few years later, I was able to put all the notes together, come up with a manuscript for the book, and there was a huge amount of maps to draw. And so it was a huge project just to get it all together into a book form. And I'm glad I did, because it does encapsulate my thinking on geomorphology, ley lines, and a number of other subjects. It's a basis. You see,
Exactly.
when I wrote the Handprint of Atlas, I was thinking, well, this is pretty sophisticated for me to come up with this, because I do not have any formal degrees in anything past high school. I am only a high school graduate. So if that puts you off and you say, well, this guy can't know much about anything, I've got a 2-year degree from a junior college. I got to know more than he does. But most of what I've learned in my life, I did not learn it in school. I found school extremely inadequate to my interest and purposes.
Yeah.
So, that's the Handprint of Atlas. So it's a very, very complicated subject to get into. We can scratch the surface of it tonight, but I will say that it came in handy when you started researching the Empire of the Wheel.
Oh boy.
I was able to step in and say, Walter, I could tell you a little bit about some of that.
Yeah, there's something weird going on in these places. And you were able, with us working together with the data I was investigating and finding out, you were able to, through all this geomorphology and such, you were able to reveal that each one of the victims of the Empire of the Wheel mystery were attacked, or they died on a spot on the telluric so-called ley line grid here in the Inland Empire. But a more bigger thing you were able to identify that I don't know if a lot of people are aware of it. It's in the first book. We were together through your analysis of this. We're able to show what every known victim of the Zodiac killer has in common. No other investigator's ever done that, and that is that each one of the victims were attacked or killed, because not all of them died, on spots on telluric current in the ley line configuration up in Northern California, and that's huge.
Yes, but I have to say, Walter, you're the one who discovered the Zodiac thing. You began applying. I had given you a ley line map.
That's right. You had given me a map a year before, and I had this map. And one night I was looking, and I plotted them. Yeah, I was the one that
plotted them.
And I contacted you, and you looked at your copy, and we were both astonished. It's like, oh my God, this is what the Zodiac was doing. This is the thing that ties it all in. And then you went in and did a finer point analysis of this.
Right.
Finer point, folks, means he got the closer scale maps and really fleshed out the details around spots and intersections of telluric current ley line that he had already identified. Here's the important point, folks, and I've said this before, I'll say it again. He had provided me with the map that I was able to plot these victim sites on a year or more before I did it. So the map, we didn't do the map after we said, hey, I wonder. No.
Right. We didn't make anything fit.
Right. It already fit. And it gave me goosebumps when that happened.
Yes, it was quite, seriously, it disturbed me because...
it's very disturbing.
Well, the whole thing's disturbing. when you first started in Cora Stanton, I said this is giving me the creeps.
Yeah.
Well, you started telling me some of the details of this. I mean, some of that stuff is really
It's
creepy,
very dark.
you know.
It's dark what they did here.
But you know, this is what investigators have to do. They have to deal with that kind of stuff to get to the truth.
And before we forget,
yeah,
remember the Empire of the Wheel stuff that went on here went on in 1915, the same year as the Pan-Pacific Exposition, in which Metamorphosis takes place. And Harry Houdini, folks, has a connection to the Empire of the Wheel milieu.
Oh, yes. So. And, you know, you were already working on the Empire of the Wheel mystery when I was writing Metamorphosis, but I didn't want to get too much into that, but there is little hints of what's going on in San Bernardino towards the end of the novel. Houdini's mentioning some things, but I didn't want to get in directly into that, because I don't think Houdini went to San Bernardino
during that time.
No, but I have definite opinions about Houdini and Walter Franklin Prince.
Right, who definitely was in the middle of the Empire of the Wheel milieu. You know, and Houdini, remember, was performing in Los Angeles during that season.
I really do believe, you know, this is not in any published work now. We're getting off the page here to our own unpublished researches, but it's for those of you who are watching this podcast. We'll say a little bit. Some of this is going to be in upcoming books, okay? Yes. But I'll say this much, that it's my opinion that Houdini knew about the Empire of the Wheel stuff, the Cora Stanton mystery, the planning of it. He knew about it, and knew about it through Walter Franklin Prince. In other words, I believe there was a prior association between Houdini and Walter Franklin Prince, at least as early as 1914. But it was completely secret. And one of the major reasons that Houdini had come out to the West Coast on this tour, of course, there was the Panama Pacific exhibition that he was doing performances there. That's what he was mainly booked for. But, you know, I think that Prince knew something terrible was going to happen in San Bernardino, and it was being planned long range, and Houdini and Prince had worked it out where Houdini could come out here and perhaps lend some aid to the investigation Prince was involved with, and I believe Cora Stanton, the woman that was being called Cora Stanton, that they were all involved with. So it's a very complex thing going on there, and it involves what Houdini did later with Walter Franklin Prince.
And exactly, I was going to say, for
it
those
all ties into that.
For those who don't know, Houdini and Walter Franklin Prince, this is more well known. In the 1920s, their investigations going after the corrupt spiritualists. I became convinced after my research and all of the stuff we're talking about, and you can read it in the books, is that what happened here in San Bernardino in 1915 involved corrupt spiritualists. There was a major spiritualist temple here at the time. In fact, the first spiritualist temple in the state of California was here. And I really think that what happened here, the dark things that were done to Cora Stanton and 3 children, remember, among the victims, was a great impetus towards Prince and Houdini going after the spiritualists.
Absolutely. It ties in directly to it. You really don't understand 1924 unless you understand 1915.
Right.
And so another thing that I began to realize after you identified the Zodiac using ley lines was that there have been some other occult murders that have used ley lines. Yes. Some of them I'm not going to talk about. You and I have talked about it, but we know what's going on. And it is a terrible thing, but it's not much we can do about it, because what's involved are terribly powerful forces, and it's these same forces that murdered Houdini.
Well, to give you to give the viewers an idea of what we're talking about, some of them know already. I have a video that I posted back then that I believe is still in my catalog of videos at the Walter Bosley channel. In the 2011 Empire of the Wheel book, the first one, Rick Spence and I present the concern that 50 or 100 years after the 1915 Empire of the Wheel events, killings, that there would emerge more killings within the same theme, milieu, vein of synchronicity, a web of synchronicity. It would involve the telluric current grid here. And we were thinking in terms of, okay, another serial killer kind of thing. What happened was I got up and made some coffee on the morning of the 2nd of December, 2015, and heard on the news that there was a terrorist attack happening here in San Bernardino. And when Sesh and I followed the details and looked at the facts that were popping up, it just made our blood run cold, because essentially that was the predictive event. The 2nd of December 2015 was the 100th anniversary of victim number 6 of the Empire of the Wheel mystery of 1915. 100 years to the day. And there's so much more, not the least of which is that the site that it happened at is at the intersection of two telluric currents on that map that I had already had for about 7 years. Okay, again, no maps were made to fit the events. The events were happening and identified as, being on this, coordinated with this map we already possessed. Okay, so really, you go back to that 2011 book, and based on the analyses that Rick Spence and I did, and with Sesh's work, we essentially, in a way, predicted what happened on the 2nd of December 2015 in San Bernardino. And that was just a taste for us. We suspected a predictive quality to synchronicities, synchronicity analysis, karmic frequency analysis, and it's not a it's a very, it has a lot of gravity. It's a grave thing.
It does, and it's
to learn.
It's grave to learn it, and it's a responsibility to know
Right.
it. And
Yeah.
I was a little I had trepidation about you revealing my idea of karmic frequencies.
Oh,
It's not anything to play with, folks.
no, it's not.
Don't play
it's not
with
a
it.
toy. It's not a toy.
No.
And synchronicity, which brings us to synchronicity. Many of us now we won't get splitting hairs about there is an actual official definition of synchronicity that
Yes.
Carl Jung
Right.
really came up with. There is the experience of synchronicity, which is just as much an experience of the aforementioned karmic frequency issue. What it is the fabric of reality has these threads. Synchronicity's part of it, karmic frequency is another part of it, and my point is this: when you look closely at that fabric and you start delving into this, nothing's the same for you ever
No,
again.
it's not.
Okay, for
No,
better and
it
worse.
will change you.
It will change your perception of everything around you, of your life, of events.
If you are grounded spiritually, that's
Yeah.
saying a lot. I'm not talking about religion,
No.
but if you're grounded spiritually, you can handle it.
Yeah.
But even then, you have to be careful. But I'm going to be probably writing on this in published form in the future, in some way, or maybe in some kind of presentation. I'll get into it, but I think it would be a good point here to address this thing about synchronicity that you're talking about, Walter. There is the Jungian concept of synchronicity, which I depart from. I don't completely I won't say I disagree with Carl Jung. It's just that he discovered it to give it a name, but philosophers and other people have known about synchronicity forever. It's been around, and the common word is coincidence, but it's a meaningful coincidence. It goes way beyond that, though. And the problem with trying to understand synchronicity, holding to our conventional model of reality, you're never going to understand it.
No.
You have to understand that causality is quite different than go back to Sir Isaac Newton and his mechanical philosophy and the idea of causality, the push, pull, action, reaction models of reality were all conditioned to believe in and to use. There's truth in that, but it's a limited aspect of reality. It's in fact, a very superficial way of looking at the universe. The deeper way of looking at the universe is that everything is connected. Everything we do is connected to everything else by, let's call it, subtle threads of being. And at a superficial conscious level, we don't see that. It's invisible to us. But there are a lot of old sayings and old axioms that express this idea beautifully. The greatest one is, as you sow, so shall you reap. That's the greatest one. And I believe it goes back thousands and thousands of years. But it is the idea, like cast your bread upon the waters. Why? Because it will return to you sevenfold, tenfold, whatever. The idea of sacrifice. Most people do not understand the idea of sacrifice. That you sacrifice something and then you get something else in return in abundance. Why does that happen? Because of the subtle threads of causation. And this is the basis of synchronicity, you see.
Yes. Yeah. It's when you combine the synchronicity experience with the personal data, and again, I'm with you. I don't want to get too far into this, but when you combine that with the personal data,
yes,
it really becomes astonishing when you can start interpreting events in your life,
right?
And the past, the present, and the predictive part is where again it gets scary. And like you said, not everyone can handle that. So it's up to the individual.
If you have the spiritual development to handle some of this information, understanding karmic frequencies can be helpful to you. If you're using the knowledge in a positive way, there's nothing wrong with that. You have to be careful, though. But you can achieve peace about things that happen to you if you know that is destined to have happened or to happen to you.
Yeah.
We're living scripts. When we're born, our lives are laid out for us, and things happen at certain points in time. It's all laid out, and there's a structure to it, and it's quite beautiful, actually, how things go. It's musical. It's harmonic.
True.
That's
a very good way to put it. Yeah. Yes. There is you introduced me to the concept of, what was it? The vector of destiny and the axis
vector of desire.
Vector of desire and the axis of circumstance.
Exactly. Yes, that plays out. Now, see, what happens is this is what I discovered, was that you can apply the abstractions of the karmic frequencies, which, if you look at it very abstractly, you're looking at a linear timeline where there's a node. You're born, you finish school, you start your career, you get married, you move into your first real house, You might move again, you might get divorced, you might get remarried. Eventually, you die. But there are these points in your life that are very significant. And it's quite obvious. I just named some off. You can get the idea, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and these don't just happen at random, they're also intermeshed with other people's timelines.
Mm-hmm.
So you will get some very interesting patterns going on. There was a guy, I
That's for
don't
sure.
remember his name, used to be on the Art Bell show, and he had a thing called the Merlin Project. Do you remember that,
Yes.
Walter?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay, well, I had already developed the karmic frequencies when I started hearing this gentleman talk, and I realized, well, he's on to some of the ideas I know about,
Mm-hmm.
but he had a very, unfortunately, simplistic view of the whole matter, and
Mm-hmm.
he was applying what little he knew to computer programs to play this thing out and make predictions.
Right.
Well, it kind of worked and it kind of didn't,
Right.
because he didn't really understand how complex the karmic
No.
frequencies are. He understood, I believe, if I remember correctly, the importance of the number nine, and he
Sure.
was using that, but he didn't understand that what nine is, because there are all kinds of numbers involved with the karmic
Oh,
frequencies. You
yes.
know,
Yes.
different spans of time and everything. And if you think that, well, um, I know that nine is the basic number, so we'll just figure everything by spans of 9 years or something like that.
Right.
No, it doesn't work that way.
No, it
So,
doesn't.
so what does nine mean? Well, nine is a fundamental structure of time that, and the ancient Egyptians understood that. Now, this gets into, you've been talking about my letters to everybody, I know.
I know. The private letters.
Yeah,
I've tried to control myself and not
yeah.
share too
So
much.
I'm
But
gonna touch on this just a little bit.
yeah.
Uh, what nine is that
Mm-hmm.
the ancient Egyptians had nine gods. It's translated as gods, which is a
Yeah.
mistranslation. It shouldn't be that. Uh, what they had were um, principles of action, uh, principles of function in nature. Now, the word God by conventional Egyptology is pronounced netter. This is what
Mm-hmm.
we hear all the time, people talking about Egyptology, the netters. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually netteru. U is plural for the Egyptians, just like S is plural for us. So netter, singular, netteru, plural, gods. That's the way it's translated. Not gods, it's functions. And what
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about here is essential functions. Uh, you have to be able to think in terms of archetypes, abstract essences. What the ancient Egyptians were dealing with were nine fundamental functions in the physical space time universe.
Mm-hmm.
And then they personified them by giving them human names, putting them in human forms, making them do human things like in a mythological story.
Right.
But this was all to encode very abstract ideas.
Right.
And so the nine netters, netteru, um, they're all about time. There are nine functions operating in the universe that create time. And
Right.
if you understand that, then you can begin to understand a little bit about the karmic frequencies. One of the important things you should know about is that all the whole number set of all multiples of nine is important
Yep.
when you begin to analyze karmic frequencies.
Yes.
Um, so nine is important, but it's not the whole story by any
It's
means. It's the
definitely
beginning.
not. Well, this all leads us to, since we've moved into the subject of time and space, and what this leads to is really how you started helping me with my research in the beginning with all of this geomorphology, and that
Yes.
goes back to my book on Disneyland, Latitude
Mm.
33, and in that book, in that research, I present the idea that Disneyland was engineered as an esoteric kind of device, a machine, I'm losing the word for it, a psychotronic.
It's device, a psychotronic device.
Psychotronic device.
The old Russian term.
Yeah, and basically the idea that the carousel was placed atop an intersection of three powerful telluric currents, and it was subsequently to that book that I was following the research by following up that Disneyland research by following the telluric currents out of Disneyland through Southern California, which led me to the whole Empire of the Whale mystery to begin with. But what it got into is also what you go into in detail in the Handprint of Atlas about telluric current and gravity wells, and these are very special spots and places with interdimensionality. And not only did you explain the Disneyland mystery, but you really can possibly explain what's even going on with the people who are, the missing 411 people in the national parks that David Pilates
Yeah, that's a huge subject. So,
yeah, just kind of give a basic overview of how the telluric currents interacting with gravity wells, how all this fits in with the time-space concept and discussion.
So, we talked about the karmic frequencies and the idea of nodes in time, right, along a linear timeline. But when you really apply the karmic frequencies completely, you begin to go into 3 dimensions of thinking and even 4 dimensions, 5 dimensions. Let me stop here and say I don't want to confuse people by going beyond 3 dimensions in my discussion. I say this in the Handprint of Atlas. I'm not a person who ascribes to the idea of 4-dimensional space, 5th-dimensional space, etc. In my opinion, there are only 3 vectors at right angles to each other in any given plenum of space. In other words, you have a volumetric space that has depth and height and width. It doesn't have 3 essential vectors of space. In other words, you give a plenum with a volume to it. Now you're going to put a plane here, and you're going to call that the essential plane of that system, and then you have a plane here, and that's the 2nd dimension, and then the 3rd plane is here, and somehow these 3 planes at right angles to each other are somehow metaphysically real. No, not at all. No, all that's happening is you're using logic to use the least number of vectors to locate an object or a point in volumetric space. It's an abstract analysis of volume. So when they start saying there are 4 dimensions of space, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, because we're talking about right angles again. When they're doing spherical geometry, that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. They're just simply using lines that are curved, Riemannian geometry and all that. They're just using curved lines, but they're not going into a 4th dimension of space. That is actually nonsensical. It's meaningless. And you have these people with PhDs in mathematics and physics putting forth all kind of 4th and 5th dimensional topological maps. You can understand them abstractly, but they have absolutely no physical reality and could not have any reality. When I talk about multi-dimensions, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about you go to another dimension and the space there is exactly like the space here. It is 3-dimensional space in that it can be analyzed with 3 vectors at right angles to each other. That's all. Now,
Okay.
space can be distorted. And I know that, you can compress space, you can elongate space, but it's still 3-dimensional space.
Right.
So where was I going with that, Walter?
We were talking about the gravity wells and its
Okay.
effect on time and such.
Okay,
Phenomena.
so, yes, right. Thank you. When you go into 3 dimensions with these karmic frequencies in time and space, and you apply it to the ley lines, you will come upon what I call nodes. I think anybody would call them nodes. It's areas where, say, 2 lines intersect. So you get a point there. That's a node, all right? At these nodes, you have disruptions in physical energy. You have disruptions in gravity, electromagnetism. You have it in Hertzian radio waves. You have it in Tesla's longitudinal waves. You get these disruptions at these nodes. And usually it's a concentration of energy. And a lot of times, for example, like on a intersection of 2 ley lines, let's just talk about gravity. You get a structure such that it's a gravity well. So gravity's going up in a funnel like this up into the sky. And as it comes down, it goes to a point down somewhere underneath the ground. Dowsers can sense where these gravity wells are at, and they'll actually go around them, and spiral into them. So these things are very real, and they are window areas to other dimensions. These parallel dimensions I'm talking about of a multi-universe reality. That's what's important about these nodes. They're window areas. Now, David Paulides has researched the disappearances of people in national parks very extensively. He shows exactly where these people disappear. And I've looked at some of the sites, and I can see where they're falling on the ley lines. And one was very dramatic. It was in not Yosemite. Let's see, was it Yosemite? I believe it was.
You have the multiple intersection of several lines in Yosemite.
Yes.
Not far from the lodge there, the main lodge.
Right, it's not far from the lodge. Right. This was an incident with a man that disappeared. I don't remember what year it was, but it was just a few years ago this happened. He was with friends, apparently, and he just wandered off. Anybody that's been to, I think it's the Awahi or Awani.
The Awani Lodge. Yeah.
Lodge. Okay, I've been there, and I know that area, and it's just full of tourists. And you'd think, how could somebody disappear?
Yeah.
But from my own personal experiences, oh yeah, they can disappear in a crowd like that and nobody will notice it. So that man disappeared on a node of a ley line that runs right through Yosemite Valley. I can't remember now offhand. I have to look at a map, but I believe there were several offshoot ley lines in that area. I think I sent you the map, didn't I, Walter?
Oh, the maps are astounding. Your analysis there.
There was also, I think it was a child out on the coast around Santa Cruz that disappeared. And that also was definitely on a ley line. So I haven't extensively analyzed Paulides' work, but the little bit of information I have highly suggests that these people that are disappearing in the national parks, but really all around the world, in other places, they disappear on ley lines. And I'll go back to the Handprint of Atlas,
right,
where I discuss the strange disappearances of people at Pyramid Lake, Nevada. This was when I was discovering the second ley line, which runs through California and into Nevada. I was very interested in Pyramid Lake and Fremont's pyramid. And I discuss how I was talking to some people, just acquaintances in connection with my work, and they didn't know anything about my interest in ley lines. They told me they were from Reno. So I just started kind of casually asking them about Pyramid Lake. And they kind of flipped out. And they were warning me, don't go there. And I said, why? Well, a lot of strange things happen in Pyramid Lake. Well, like what? Well, like people disappear there a lot. Really? I never heard about it. They said, yeah, but it happens. And they get out on a fishing boat and then they just disappear. And when people go looking for them, they find the boat, they find the fishing tackle and their property on the boat. Doesn't look like any foul play. The people are just gone. They're never heard from again. In other words, this was the same kind of phenomena that David Paulides was researching later on. But
Right.
this conversation I had occurred about 1988. And they were talking about stuff that happened several years earlier. So let's say the 1970s, early 80s when this stuff was going on. So these are places where reality thins out, our reality thins out, and under the right conditions, the conditions are unknown exactly what else needs to be in place for these things to happen, but what might occur is an interdimensional transference. You pop into another dimension, but other things could happen too. You could teleport. People do teleport along ley lines. They don't talk about it, but it happens. What else can happen? You
It's
can travel.
it's one of the options that I offer to explain the mysterious encounter with Alfred in my Latitude
Yes.
33 book.
Oh, absolutely. You see, the carousel at Disneyland, where it was originally, was just such a node as we're talking about.
Right.
And now you told me about Alfred. The first time you told me about it, I kind of thought, well, maybe, it might be something to it, but I was a little bit skeptical. In fact, I've always been skeptical of you, Walter.
Yeah, and that's important.
Well,
That's important to note.
yeah,
And let
yeah.
the folks know is Sesh has never just gone in all in from the beginning when I've said, hey, this, that, and the other. He uses critical thinking. He analyzes things. He comes around, if he agrees, it's after much analysis and stuff. But I didn't mean to, you were getting ready to say along these lines and within the context of what you're talking about, you can teleport, and then you were about to say
Yeah.
you can also travel. Go ahead with that thought. I
Okay.
didn't mean to interrupt you.
You can also travel in time. If you think you cannot travel in time, you're just completely wrong. You can travel in time. Exactly what will happen to you when you do travel in time could be very many things. You might travel in time and not come back at all. This, I believe, is something that's happening to these people that are disappearing in the national parks. They could very well be going into the past or the future to a version of our past or future. We're
Right.
talking about multiverses here. So they're going into a past, but it could be almost, for all practical purposes, exactly like the past we've already lived through. They could go back to their own past. Yes, indeed. And so all kind of strange things can happen. Now, until you experience these things, or until credible people experience them and tell you about them, you're going to say, this is all crazy. It's all wacko. But, the people listening tonight, watching tonight, have had their own experiences. So I think each person can approach this information a little on their own, from their own point of view, and correlate it with what they already know.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, it's all, and this is why I was very excited to have you on tonight, because this is a discussion which clearly, and you and I both know personally, because we've had phone conversations that have gone on for hours.
Oh, yeah.
And our visits that we've had where we've actually, met up in Sonora, California.
Yes.
That has to do with Del Shaw and all that.
Fantastic.
And at Disneyland. We went to Disneyland
Yes.
together with your brothers in 2009.
That-
and
memorable.
Again, yeah, this could just go on, forever. But we're at the point where let's bring the folks in the live chat into the discussion
Okay.
and go to their questions. So remember, if you have a question, put it in all caps, please, so that we know that it's a question for us. Because as we know, folks, a lot of side conversations go on in live chat. I don't want to miss your comment or your question by not seeing it. So let's see. It usually takes a couple of seconds to catch up.
The evening's going really fast, Walter.
Oh, I know. Well, that's what this subject does. Talk about time travel. You get into this subject, and you experience a time crunch.
Yeah.
Missing time. Oh, let's see. I can't. Okay, Ari Bavel says, Bavel. Ari, you guys, I'm sorry, I'm butchering your name tonight. Sorry, Cardinal. Does that explain deja vu? You are returned to your own timeline just a teeny bit out of sync. What do you think about that, Sesh? Does it?
I think that generally various knowings of the past and future, precognitions of various type, have to do with these out of sync timelines. Exactly how it plays, I don't know, but I don't think deja vu is time travel. You are in this time, but you're getting information from either literally the past or the future in your own timeline, or you're getting information from some parallel reality. And I know about these parallel realities in terms of precognitive dreams. I've had many, many, many precognitive dreams in which things are a little different than they actually play out in reality, but it's still very, very similar. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
Catnip 40 asks if Wonder of the Worlds will be made available again. Well, as I said early on, yes, we're inching closer to the re-release of the Wonder of the Worlds Book 1, the original book in the trilogy, and it's going to be in a very special first hardcover release from my company. So look for that sometime in January, because we want it to be just right. It's almost done. I got to send Sesh the galley so he can take a look at it, but it's coming very soon, and believe me, you'll know it when it's available, because I'll be talking about it big time. So yes, it will be. And we have another one here. Freckled Joy asks, have you heard about any ley line activity in Rainbow, California?
No.
Is that Rainbow down in by San Diego, right? Down between Escondido, that area? I think is what she's talking about. Have you, Sesh, heard of any there?
Okay, am I familiar with the Seth material? Somebody's asking megalithic. Let me answer that other one first, okay? I have never heard of Rainbow, California, and I am a native Californian, and I know most of the towns, but that's not surprising. There's a lot of little spots that aren't on maps, regular maps. And
Sesh, I'll throw in here. I know where it's at, and when you're
Yeah.
going from Temecula to San Diego, and you're going through that, I call it Temecula Pass. You get up in the mountains there, which
Right.
I know is going to be a flag for you. That if it's located up in the hills,
Right.
up in the mountains, there's an exit in the middle of the pass to the little town of Rainbow, and
Little
that's
town
where
of
it's
Rainbow.
at. Sounds like we need
Well,
to do an analysis of that.
we need to do an analysis of Rainbow. Usually, when a place has an unusual name like Rainbow, is suggestive that that name was acquired through something unusual, and it may be that the people that lived in that area had a propensity of observing rainbows quite a bit, having to do something with its orientation near the coast of California, the seawater coming in the atmospheric clouds or whatever coming in a certain way, in a certain pattern because of the shape of the land, creating rainbows more often than usual. And because of this, it suggests that there might be some unusual geomorphology there that might help explain if there has been phenomena in that area. So I'd
Hmm.
have to look at that more, but I think it seems very interesting. I'd like to
Hmm.
look into
Well,
that.
we'll do that. We'll
Yeah.
definitely do that. So megalithic again with the question, Sesh, are you familiar with the Seth material?
Okay. Actually, I'm not that familiar with it. I know it's channeled material. I flipped through it years ago. My pen name, Sesh Heri, has nothing to do with Seth. Okay. It's only a coincidence, truly a coincidence of phonetics. My name, Sesh Heri, it's a pen name, and it is uh, ancient Egyptian for high scribe. I chose that pen name uh, because it relates to my real name, which I'm going to get into that later this year, talking about my real name and everything. But right now, I'm continuing just to go by Sesh Heri. And I consider Sesh Heri a real title that I've earned, and in fact, um, that is mine by birthright, by lineage. So, without getting into a lot of detail there, I will be getting to that later because I've written some things that Walter will be publishing later
Oh
on, and
yes.
we'll
Oh,
get
and it's
into all of
amazing.
that. You
It's
know,
amazing. The stuff you guys haven't seen that he's shared with me is mind boggling. From Todd Wood, the young guy that I work on, some great young researcher out there who I work on stuff with. He
oh
says, great
Todd,
show. Yeah, Todd. Yeah, great show tonight. I think time travel is real. I hope to listen to audio versions of your books, Sesh, your books one day. And he mentions he's been sending me some data on a town called Empire, Nevada, which apparently is up there where Pyramid Lake is. Are
yeah.
you familiar with anything interesting about Empire, Nevada?
No, but I'm gonna, if you think there's something interesting there, Todd, I'm definitely going to look into it. There's a lot in Nevada that's of interest, and I've never had the time to, go back and look at all that. But the whole place is brimming with mysteries. All of Western Nevada, but also the middle of Nevada. Obviously, we have Area 51 and all that. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, now, I'll say this: that I was asked to analyze Area 51 for its geomorphological properties. And I think I could say this much that I found that it didn't have much in the way of geomorphological properties. It's a sort of neutral zone, gravity
Right.
neutral zone.
Isn't that
Uh,
interesting?
I mean, sometimes it's the dog that didn't bark in the night, and
Yeah.
it's one of those things. So, yeah, all that in Western Nevada is a very interesting area. And it's also the site of an ancient civilization of giants who had red hair.
Ah,
And,
yes.
and,
Interesting.
and so, and that's what Fremont's pyramid was probably part of that civilization.
Sure,
It- it-
sure,
you know.
yeah. Remember, folks, I talk a bit about this in Secret Missions 5, Veiled Destinies. I refer to Sesh's research and Handprint of Atlas regarding Fremont and what Cabrillo and the Spanish might actually have been looking for. So, it touches on all this in Secret Missions 5. Gringo Fett asks you, Sesh, are there any ley lines to alert currents near Stone Mountain, Georgia? Anything of interest near Stone Mountain?
Mountain, Georgia is a ley line. It
Exactly.
is a huge node. It's in my book, The Handprint of Atlas. I
Yes, it
discuss
is.
Stone Mountain, Georgia. It's
Yeah.
extremely important. Stone Mountain originally, before the Europeans came into that area, was ringed by stones all at the summit, and there was only one opening in that wall, and you had to crawl through it. Doesn't that remind you of the Great Pyramid? And right
Mm-hmm.
in the center of Stone Mountain was a pancake shaped rock, a huge megalithic stone, and it was cut to form a cross. It was called the Devil's Crossroads. And it was the exact center of the ley line. Now, in the late 19th century, some enterprising gentleman broke that stone up and used it for building materials in Atlanta, Georgia.
Figures.
It's just too bad. But I've been to the top of Stone Mountain, Georgia, and you can see where the Devil's Crossroads was located once. And it's a fantastic site. So, yes, it's two major ley lines crossed through there, and one of them is the first ley line I ever discovered that I call the Line of Dundee, and it's the long central axis of the Florida Peninsula.
Yeah, Gringo Fett, you got to read Handprint of Atlas. It's available at Lulu with the other stuff that I offer. And the destruction of that pancake stone, that brings to mind our idea that just like disengaging the device, the Cytotronic device that is Disneyland, by moving the carousel in 1982. Maybe there was a little more behind the destruction of that Devil's Crossroads stone than mere commerce, but we'll go on. Yeah,
I didn't want to get into it, but you're absolutely right, Walter.
Yeah. Cole Brady says he loves both your books, so thank you, Cole.
Thank you very much.
And but yes, Wonder of the World's hardcover's coming out soon. Number 6, Sesh, what's your opinion on the afterlife's interaction with the living? Does it happen?
Yes, it does happen. But I caution everybody to be very careful with it. Particularly if you have lost a loved one, there's the inclination to want to contact that person. It's extremely dangerous. This is what Houdini knew secretly, but he was fighting the spiritualist in a public manner, and he was basically approaching it like, well, I'm a materialist, more or less. I'm a scientific thinker. But Houdini was actually a very esoteric individual. He had psychic powers himself, and he knew the dangers of it. That's the whole thing with the Empire of the Wheel and the stuff about Houdini coming out in 1915 to California. It's all connected to this esoteric side of the man. And he was very concerned about all these people who were attempting to contact their loved ones through spiritualism, but it was extremely dangerous because what happens is disincarnate intelligences impersonate the dead, and they're very, very evil, and they're trying to draw you into their evil. So I would say do not attempt to contact departed people, whether you know them or not. But one thing that I know does happen, those that we love who have passed away, they will come to us in our dreams. And that's a good thing. That's completely acceptable. And they will communicate to us in metaphors and in archetypes and in ritual gesture. So when you have a dream, consider what it means. It's probably the person trying to communicate to you, and they're doing it in this form. So yes, the soul definitely goes on.
I think so. Yes. Sam R.I. says that he lived in Riverside, San Bernardino area his whole life, never knew it had such weird history. Neither did I, Sam, until I stumbled into the Empire of the Wheel mystery, specifically stumbled into the Cora Stanton mystery. Thank you, Ann Walker, the local librarian who first told me about Cora Stanton. And I didn't know. I spent much of my life here too and had no idea either until I started looking into it.
And you will find that a lot of places have weird history. The people live there all their life and they don't know.
Yeah, you just got to look into it. Robert Huffine says, Walter, will you be collaborating with Sesh Heri on any future books? In a way, Sesh, I look at Latitude 33
Yeah,
and the Empire of the Wheel books as a collaboration already, because
right.
I talk about you in those
Absolutely.
books. You've contributed to those books so much that,
Yeah,
in a way, actually, we've already been collaborating for
absolutely.
several years. So,
Absolutely. And I think we have also, there's been a cross pollination.
absolutely,
You've
yeah.
influenced me, I've influenced you and some of your fiction, I think.
Yeah,
And
but
it's been a
maybe,
good thing.
maybe down the road we do need to do one where we're the actual co-authors. So thank you for the
Absolutely. I think
suggestion.
so.
We'll talk about that. He
We
and I.
probably will as things go on. Yeah.
Yeah. Samurai adds, Empire of the Wheel was pretty mind bending. Oh, yeah, you're not kidding. It was. It
It's
was.
still bending my mind.
Yeah, I'll throw this out. Rick Spence, my co-author, who retired now, I believe, a history of professor at the University of Idaho, a
Yes.
serious professional scholar. And I
Yeah.
heard him say early on, after we released the book, in more than one interview, that the concept of synchronicity, he didn't think so much about it until he said that after he started working on the Empire of the Wheel stuff with me, he started experiencing it.
Yes. That is
And
what happens.
yeah. And
That is what happens.
everybody who has helped me on this to some degree, whether, local associates who did field research with me, or, like Sesh with the analysis, our friend Joseph Farrell and others, they will tell you that it came knocking at some point.
Yes.
It has resonance. So,
Absolutely.
Dion Williams asks both of us, have you heard of Frank Joseph and his research on vortexes? I've heard of Frank Joseph. I don't think I've heard about his research on vortexes. Seismic areas where there is granite rock or fissures, and the pressure from the rocks creates piezoelectricity. Sesh,
True.
oh
Yeah.
boy, that's a big theme in the Handprint of Atlas. Go
Oh,
with that.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know quite a bit about Frank Joseph, and
Mm-hmm.
he was, I don't know if he's still alive or not. Do you know, Walter?
He might not be. I'm not
You
sure.
know, he was an older man some years ago, but
Mm-hmm.
I've read a couple of his books. He was a very good researcher. He got me interested in Aztalan in Wisconsin, which
Mm-hmm.
is on a ley line. It's part of the system of ley lines, this major ley line that I call the Line of Dundee. If you read the Handprint of Atlas, you will you will see in it a whole section there on Aztalan. This was researched by Frank Joseph, and he did sonar readings of the bottom of Aztalan. There are pyramids on the bottom of Rock Lake in Aztalan. It's a very unusual place. If you ever get an opportunity to go to Wisconsin, you've got to see Aztalan, just like you have to see Rock Gate, Coral Castle. There's some of these must-do places if you're into alternative research. I went to Aztalan. I walked around the grounds of the compound there. It's a very intriguing place. I'm a little bit psychic, and I definitely got an impression of something like an apocalyptic scenario playing out there thousands of years ago. Later on, reading, I think it was in one of Frank Joseph's books, where he talks about the history of Aztalan, that's the way that town ended. They destroyed themselves. They got into black magic and they started practicing human sacrifice, and it destroyed their civilization.
Yeah.
So, read about that. The people that lived in there, they were mining copper, and Europeans were coming in through the Great Lakes. Phoenicians were coming up into Michigan to get this copper to take it back to Europe. It's all part of suppressed histories, that you're not going to learn about in history courses in the university, but these are things that really happened, and the artifacts are there. Frank Joseph was a bit of an expert on that field, so
Yeah.
I highly recommend his work.
You mentioned forbidden stuff we're not supposed to know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There is what I also, little bit I know about Frank Joseph is that there was a period there where he came under some controversy because he was accused of what was it, it was some type of racism with
Yeah.
anti-native ideas and stuff. And I don't know the full details of that
Hmm.
whole controversy. I don't
Yeah.
know if that's really the case, if he had some type of agenda, or if what it was is that's a common character attack that they will do on scholars who are presenting an alternative narrative to what mainstream science wants people to
It
go
could
with.
very
I
well
don't
be,
know. I don't
I
know, but
it's a lot of things with these researchers. I don't like to get into other researchers too much, talking about them.
right.
And but anybody who talks about Egypt and the idea of the advanced technology,
Mm-hmm.
there are people who will accuse you of
Right.
racism or other things like that, and the intent is not there at all. We're just following the
Right.
information as best we can, and
Right. 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 Megalithic says Seth, the Seth material refers to the nodes you describe as coordinate points. That sounds like that might be interesting for you to look
could
at.
be. I'd have to
Yeah.
look at what he says or said. I don't know anything about this gentleman, and I just know it's channeled, and I am very suspicious of any channeled material. Um, your conscious mind is being taken over by an unknown intelligence, and it's just like playing with a Ouija board. Absolutely
Yeah.
not. If you're playing with a Ouija board, you might as well, it's just the most terrible thing you could do. Do not do
Yeah.
it. I I
Right.
I, I never did it, but I know I've had friends who've told me horror stories about it.
Yeah, that's my
Um,
position as well on
and
that.
the whole channeling thing is I'm concerned about the disinformation, misinformation that you're going to get, and particularly the disinformation, because like you're talking that um, you know Seth is talking about coordinate points. Well, maybe there might be something to that, but it might be something very misleading in the surrounding context of it. So I'd be very careful. I just caution,
Well, in the coming
any.
year, I'm going to be able to give you some insight on the Seth material because Megalith has sent me several key books of the Seth material that, due to my eye situation before my eyesight was corrected this summer, for months I wasn't able to get to them, and I'm going to be getting to them this coming year. So I'll have discussions with Sesh as I read the material myself, and he might have some comment on it down the road. So it will look at the coordinate points aspect, because you guys know me, I'm don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Whereas you might have a difference of opinion on certain points with some stuff, there might be others that still have value to them. So we'll talk about that. Philip Blair quotes Mark Twain. The quote is, "In the first place, God made idiots. This was for practice. Then he made school boards."
Yeah,
He
yeah.
wants to know what you think about that. I think we
I love
agree.
it. Well, it's certainly something Mark Twain might have said, but see, there's a whole genre of jokes and things, sayings that are ascribed to Mark Twain that he never said. It's in his style. Now, I've read quite a bit of Twain, and I don't recognize that as something he really said, but it's in his style of quips. So
Sure.
I enjoy it. It's funny, but
Yeah, it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
yeah,
Dion Williams says she's continuing what she said before. She's saying the piezoelectricity creates an ionized atmosphere nicknamed the Andes glow, and these areas the ancients used to enter a field to communicate with so-called others. What do you think of that?
well, I don't know quite what to think of it other than I know that piezoelectricity is definitely involved in the ley lines and in the nodes of ley lines, and psychic phenomena is involved with the ley lines. And so essentially, yes, that does occur. Um, the most, in regard to that idea, the most famous of these nodes is the Oracle of Delphi.
Mm-hmm.
And in my most recent novel I've just written, I hint at something in the prologue about the Oracle of Delphi, and it's something that I didn't put it in the handprint of Atlas or anything, but you had these navels of the world. What is that all about? Well, what they were points that had spread out from the side of the Giza Plateau. The Giza Plateau is the navel of the world. That's where all the landmass came from for planet Earth. But as the continents broke apart, some of the adjoining landmass spread away, and you get little pieces of it here and there that really belonged up there with the Giza Plateau. And one of the most important ones the is Delphi, and where the Omphalmos stone is located.
Yes.
And that was an oracle site. So, yes, certainly ley lines have been used for that purpose without question. And that's the most famous one right there.
Sure, sure. We have time for 3 more questions, and the first one is Freckled Joy says the Inland Empire, here San Bernardino Valley is included in that, was founded by Mormons and spiritualists, and some crazy stuff happened there back in the day. That is absolutely true, Freckled Joy, and that's some of the stuff I learned for the first time when I was investigating all this. As a matter of fact,
connection between spiritualism and the Mormons too. That I'm going to get into that a little bit in one of my books.
Oh, it's really interesting. Brigham Young recalled the Mormons specifically from San Bernardino, commenting that hell reigns there. It rules there, that was his comment. But it is a fact. There were several of the settlers and pioneers that came over here with the Mormons that weren't Mormons themselves. They were the leaders in founding the first spiritualist group here in San Bernardino, and there were several Mormons who joined this spiritualist group.
Yes.
So it was interesting. Our second of our last 3, Philomath 360. In your opinion, Sesh, did Mark Twain write anything in the fantastic realism style? Oh, I think
yes,
so.
He did. He did. He got more into that in his old age. So, particularly his connection to Tesla there, he learned a lot from Tesla, he never wrote about it in a nonfiction form, but he would couch it in his fiction. And most of that fiction has never been published. Some of it has. But the novel I'd like to recommend to Philomath 360 is The Mysterious Stranger. If you haven't read it, definitely read it. It relates to Wonder of the Worlds because I have a character in Wonder of the Worlds called the Man in the Silk Hat.
Yes.
And as I developed Wonder of the Worlds, the Man in the Silk Hat is supposed to be the real life counterpart later on when Mark Twain wrote The Mysterious Stranger. I don't say this, but a savvy reader would infer, he got the idea for The Mysterious Stranger from this man in the silk hat who is connected to Nikola Tesla. This is the interdimensional entity that is constantly contacting Tesla and talking to him in very cryptic ways about his work and appearing and disappearing mysteriously. So read The Mysterious Stranger. You can read it before or after Wonder of the Worlds, but the two are connected. Yep.
So excellent. Yeah, you guys, I'm telling you, you're going to love Wonder of the Worlds. If you haven't read it, you got to read it. So on to the final question from Megalithic Yard. Does Sesh think the Zero Meridian should be relocated back to Giza?
No, I do not. It's in its proper place. The proper place is Greenwich, New England. Geomorphologists conventionally claim that the pole of the land hemisphere is in the English Channel, but I've determined that it actually falls precisely on Greenwich, England, and that's why you have the Greenwich Observatory there. They know what they're doing. That is the prime meridian running through there. And it's there for a reason, because that divides the land masses of the earth into two exact halves. Originally, say 200 million years ago, the place where that happened was the Giza Plateau. The prime meridian went right through the Giza Plateau. Pangea was one big pancake, and in the middle of that circle was the Giza Plateau. So you have the prime meridian running right through it.
Hmm.
As the continents broke apart, that prime meridian started shifting westward until today it is at Greenwich, England. And so it's in exactly the right place.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hey, believe it or not, we're at almost at the 2 hour point. And
Goodness.
as we said earlier, we could go on and on and on. So what that means is we're going to have to do this again.
Yeah.
So we'll probably it'll probably be into the new year before we can
Oh, yeah.
make that happen. We got the holidays coming up, and everybody gets busy and such. But we will definitely, if you're up for it, we'll make this
Yeah.
happen. Maybe sometime after we make Wonder the Worlds available, the
Yeah.
release of the hardcover edition. Is there anything in closing that you want to share about any writing coming up, or any thoughts, any closing thoughts?
I'm doing a lot of writing right now.
Hmm.
The last year and a half, I've really been into it. I've just finished a new novel.
Hmm.
I'm going to be finishing up a second novel very soon in the next few months. And this will comprise a brand new trilogy of novels, an entirely new subject matter, all done in fantastic realism. I'm
Hmm.
also preparing a new nonfiction book. So a lot of stuff's coming out. I'm doing a lot more research now, and I'm just very, very busy with everything. And so it's going to be exciting 2023 to see
Uh,
some of this start to come out. And we have some novel. We
Definitely.
have at least one novel coming out. I hope.
Hmm.
I think I want to say it. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, one novel I hope Walter will bring out in 2023,
Oh yeah.
uh, entitled Vento and the
Yep.
Voice of Ray.
Yep.
Um, and I love
And
that
that
novel. It's a
and
short
it's a
little novel, but
one-off. It,
yeah,
it's it's a
just
it's a single story,
yeah,
but you guys are going to find that one real interesting as well. And again, this is why I say, read the fiction that that we're talking about. This stuff we're writing, folks. There's more to it than just entertainment. And all these things we're talking tonight,
Mike.
in all of Sesh Heri's fiction, it's loaded with his nonfiction research. So, don't discount it just because it is a fictional framework for the ideas and the things that he has found and discovered, and his analyses. Just grab these things up and read them, because when you do read his nonfiction, you'll understand really the nonfiction better, because you'll have
Yeah.
when it's presented in the fictional format, it gives you an example of a practical example of what he's talking about in the nonfiction. So they go together. It's more than fiction, folks. It's more than fiction. So I strongly urge you to read it.
Walter, I want to say to Mike Clellan, send me your current address so we can correspond.
Oh yes, yes,
You can do that.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do that. So, well, Sesh, I want to thank you profusely, and I want to thank your tech webmeister there, James. Thank you so much for
Yes.
helping
James
make this
Thames.
happen, and
Yes.
this
And
has been
by the
fantastic.
way, I want to say James Thames, the artist, has did that animated cover tonight. That was
Yeah.
his work, and I thought he did a fantastic job on it. He just whipped
Oh
it
yeah.
together.
It was cool to open up with that. I really like that. I
Yeah.
really like that. So, anyway, I think we got to bring it to a close. Again, Sesh, thank you so much. This was great. I really want to do this again, and I'll keep everybody posted on the release date for the Wonder of the Worlds Book One. That's the special hardcover edition. But you don't have to have Book One to read Metamorphosis and the Lost Pleiad, and they are available right now at lulu.com. Go get them, go grab them. The Handprint of Atlas is there as well, and there's going to be much more in the coming year.
Absolutely.
So thanks again, Sesh, and I'm going
Thank
to
you,
say
Walter.
good night to you and to everybody until next Sunday. Thanks again, everybody.